I heard that the youngest person here is about 17 years old. So given that, I think, and since I've been in genomics for about 18, I think I'm qualified enough to be an expert in this area. So what I thought I would basically go back to is that the first instance of personalized medicine was initially in the traditional systems of Ayurveda and also the Chinese medicine. So that's about 1500 BC. After that, in about 460 BC, when Hippocrates was born, he basically talked about the person that the disease has rather than the disease the person has, right? So I think we were on the right track, but somewhere along the line, I think we lost the whole concept of individualization or personalization of medicine. And I think we have been making a comeback to personalized medicine using genomics as being one of the base levels of what we can do. And as we've seen, I think there are a lot of countries that have started to work on personalized medicine. I think the earliest that we saw was Iceland that looked at Decode. I mean, Decode did a lot of work in that space. But I think what they also did was not just looking at sequencing or looking at expression, but they also looked at a lot of the pedigree analysis, a lot of familiar information that came along with that. Then we saw Netherlands doing this. We've seen the 100,000 genome project from the UK. There's Japan, there's Finland, and Estonia, and I think also some of the Indian states that have just started to announce using genomics as one of the tools to be able to do that. So what's happening? Like, what happened suddenly that we have now started to move towards this whole space of personalized medicine? I think is the fact that it is getting a lot cheaper. It is also the fact that the consumers are starting to realize that it's not just about the physician whose responsibility it is to treat them, but it's also their own responsibility, and that they understand there's a role that your genes have in terms of the therapy and so on. So I think that has been the main driver. And so when you look at the 4 Ps that they call of personalized medicine, it's preventive, it's predictive, it's personalized, and it's participatory. And I think that's where most of what is happening in the personalized space is going on. Now, why prevention, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about more from where I look at it. I think when you look at prevention, the reality is that if you do look at information if you do start to prevent disease, it's much lower cost than when you go back to when it's at the late chronic stage. Now in India, where I'm stationed, where I belong, I think 62% of healthcare is paid by the consumer, which means it is truly a consumer friendly country, right? In terms of healthcare, we pay for it. So we should be in charge of what we should get in terms of what we actually get from the healthcare system. The other thing is prevention is better than cure. 80% of cardiovascular diseases are likely to be able to be, you can prevent them. You can prevent 50% of cancers and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we can do with just small interventions. But I think this is where the problem lies, that if you look at all the data that's there in the world today, I think most of the data is still Caucasian heavy. We still see that a lot of it now, a little bit is coming in from the Chinese governments. But when you look at 20% of the world's population, which is Indian, we find only about 0.2% of the data that is of Indian origin. So I think that was my motivation to say that we are working on, I was working on a company which was doing a lot of work with pharma. We were working on gene expression databases and all of that. But I felt that there was somewhere where the representation of the actual population versus the actual representation in global databases was somewhat mismatched. And I think that was my motivation to start Mapmygenome about 5 years ago. So there are many areas that I think personalized medicine can make a difference. The first being prevention, where you can understand if there's predisposition to a particular disease, or you understand certain traits, and you can actually make certain changes in terms of lifestyle, in terms of screening tests, and so on. You can also look at it as saying, can you actually achieve nirvana, right? So when I talked to one of the Bollywood actors, and he said, I don't want to know if I have a disease. So I said, well, he said, I just want to live forever. And I said, that's, so I said, while I can't promise you nirvana, one of the aims is that personalized medicine actually helps you understand a little bit more about yourself, and hopefully you'll be able to live longer than if you didn't know that information yourself. So I think, when you start thinking about longevity, you start looking at how you can take all the information that's today there from, digitization of all the activities that you do, all your clinical information. Maybe there is a path towards a better, and more longer life. The second, obviously, the more common ones are on the pharmacogenomics, understanding if certain drugs work for you or not. We also look at stratifying tumors for treatment. I think that's become fairly commonplace. We're looking at newborn screening, which in India, unfortunately, is less than 3% of the babies born, and diagnosing and characterizing monogenic diseases. But I think the one area which is most exciting is the whole area on big data and AI. You now start to get information from a lot of different sources, and you have the means to be able to analyze it, not just as individual data points for one individual, but to look at it from a population-wide scale. Right? And I think that's where you can also start seeing that we're starting to think about personalized medicine. We are looking at it as saying that the costs have been going down, but I think the biggest driver has been what the FDA and other regulatory authorities have been doing, right? We see 35% of all the drugs that are being approved today are personalized medicine. We are also seeing that 73% of cancer compounds, as well as 42% of non-cancer compounds, have a biomarker that is associated with them. So I think that's what you're seeing as a trend. So why pharmacogenomics, right? And I think a lot of people might have seen this picture which came in Nature, but this is the age of imprecision. I think most of the drugs we take today, and these are some of the top 10 drugs that we have, somewhere between 1 out to 4 and 1 out to 25 is where you have good responders, which means we today live in an age of imprecise medicine. So if we don't look at how we're going to understand if this drug is going to be effective for that individual, then I think we're thinking that we're getting the right medication, but we probably aren't. So I think this is where it is, that most of 50% of the drugs are wrongly prescribed. And I think you can see that diagram there. The blue ones are the ones that actually respond. The red ones are the ones that don't respond. So you can see today we have a lot of drugs that we don't respond well to. But there are about 150 drugs that the FDA has given information on whether you can do genomic testing and be able to understand if those drugs are going to work for you or not. So I think that's where you have to move towards precision medicine, understanding whether those drugs are going to work for that individual, and then be able to make that move towards precision medicine. So I think it's not just about genomics, not just about saying, I can sequence all these people, get information on whether the drug is going to work for you or not. It's not just about telling people you have a risk for something, but it's also about being able to say, can we get the underlying information that comes with all of that, which means, can we understand clinical information about that individual? Can we look at other data forms that come from there, whether it's your Fitbits, whether it's your other sensors that you carry around, or can you get information on their blood test and other such things? So I think participatory, which was one of the 4 Ps I talked about, I think this is where consumers come in. Consumers today can actually make the biggest difference in healthcare. So when I want to simplify things, I'd say, when you Google yourself and say, who am I? I think the simplest way to be able to make this is to say, I'm equal to DNA plus the environment I belong in, as well as the behavior that changes that you can make to yourself. So I think a little bit about what I've been doing. I think I've been in the business for more than 18 years now, actually. We started consumer genomics about 4.5 years, clinical genomics about 2 years ago. But we have a product called Genome-Patri, which I say is priceless, because it's where consumers have started to come in, and they just take a little bit of saliva. People get a little kit, they take a little swab, they send it to us, and that's how we get their DNA. We also believe very strongly that it's not about giving somebody information about their genetic, you give her, whether it's saliva, whether it's blood, you can get your DNA information, but the real value comes from explaining to them what this means and what you can do in terms of changing the behavior by understanding the environment they're in as well as their DNA. right? So you do all of that. Now I thought I'll maybe tell a little bit about some of the recent case studies that we've done. So Genome-Patri is the one that we would look at healthy individuals like yourselves who would come in, order a test, like a 23andMe, but we don't focus on ancestry. We don't tell you where you came from. We hopefully know where you can figure that out. But what we are trying to do is to be able to look at your DNA, but be able to help you understand if there's something you can do, whether it's in changes in your diet and lifestyle and modifications, but also give you information in terms of helping you understand if there are screening tests available, if there's something that your doctor can do or get to understand more about what you can do. And we take some cases from Genome-Patri as well as whole genome sequencing, which typically comes from a doctor or someone who just says that, I just want to understand if I want to actually get a whole genome sequencing done. Right? So these are some examples of what has happened. I've taken some cases where something additional happened beyond changes in diet and lifestyle. So the first case is Indian population. A person had a history of heart-related deaths, maternal aunt, as well as maternal grandmother. There were migraines for the self and sister. Son had epilepsy. So I think, it just did this test saying, it sounds like a cool thing for you to do. What we did find was that there was recommendation of looking at CADASIL as a possibility. And that was a gene we said maybe there is something over there. And I think we did find that mutation. And therefore, that information was helpful for the physician to be able to then say, what can you actually change in this person's treatment. The second was a person was an Ashkenazi Jewish, family history of breast cancer and colorectal polyps. We found that this person needed additional testing. And then I think at this point, I think that's still ongoing. The third was the patient's daughter had a history of seizures. We recommended a clinical exome. This is after doing the initial test and during counseling. Then we found a mutation, and that information was then sent to the neurologist to be able to make certain changes in the treatment. The other ones which we are proud of is being able to help some of the elite athletes making changes in terms of their performance. So we said, you have somebody who's already very fit, who's probably already healthier than most of us. How do we identify where their diet or where their fitness regimen can be changed? And I think this is where we looked at. We looked at a lot of genetic predisposition, but we then worked with a lot of their coaches, their nutrition experts, and others to be able to make changes in their diet and lifestyle. The last example in this case is someone who had a family history of breast cancer, didn't want to go to a doctor to find out if there was actually breast cancer, but we did find that because there was a risk, I think the person was sort of nudged towards going to a doctor, and that's when we found out that she actually had early stages of breast cancer and was treated well. So we find a lot of cases like that you can actually help people understand. Most cases you are able to change or nudge them towards a healthier lifestyle, but in many cases, I think there are also areas that you can actually make some changes in terms of what you can do in terms of further treatment. Now here is one case of cancer, and I'm not going to go through all the details of what is there, but this person was already presented with cancer, and it was a pancreatic carcinoma that was presented in this case. So they came to us, they said, we wanted to do a whole genome sequencing to understand actually what was there. And the result of that was we did find a particular mutation, but it was a mutation which was in colorectal cancer, which was then spread to the others. So I think that was an example of where you might find something that is presenting, but you might actually find on the genetic side, you might find a mutation where you will see that it was completely different from, not completely different, but the origin was somewhere else. The second case is that of infertility, right? You're looking at a 32-year-old female, non-consanguous, married, but they're having difficulty in terms of conception. And I think this is where we found 2 mutations. And therefore, once we found this out, we were able to then recommend to them what can be done as future course, right? And this was again given to the doctors. The third, and this is case 3, was that of Crohn's disease. There was a This was clinical history was childhood gastroenteritis, appendicitis, and so on. We did find a particular mutation which was homozygous, and we found that as a risk factor, and that information was given. The person changed their diet and lifestyle, but also based on the pharmacogenomics, we did recommend that they move to a particular medication which would work for this patient. So these are just some examples. Now there's clearly, I think, with all that is happening around Facebook and Google and all of that, I think there are concerns, and the concerns are on ROI, privacy, and more. The first is, will genomics create a positive ROI? And I think, as the cost of test is going down, and as most deaths caused by non-communicative diseases like cardiovascular and others can be prevented, I think we are seeing that that is a true change in terms of the total cost. And the aggregate, so when you use this as a base, you are still being able to find out that this actually creates a positive ROI because you're looking at it from the early part of where the cost is much lower. The second is privacy, right? I think when you think about science and you think about all that has happened, we are today focused on that the cost today is, whatever we are doing today has been based on the knowledge that has come from thousands of generations before us. So I think there's really a value in terms of saying, can we actually build this in the future generations? But I guess, we also see that there's research, there's access, and there's usage, right? So these are three separate things, and while they are somewhat connected, I think there's a possibility of being able to actually make those two contextually different. So I think, and the final word is that there is no force that can stop something whose time has come. And I think right now is the time that as the consumer becomes more central, we get more data of different kinds, and you have artificial intelligence to make better decisions than us. I think it's time to make genomics mainstream. Thank you.